Hello everyone, and welcome. My name is Grimoire, and today I am honored to be reading to you the first chapter of my first book, Darkest Ages, Wolves of the North. This book is dedicated to my beautiful girlfriend, Gabriella, who always encouraged me to continue, to my old friend JT, who stomached my endless lore ramblings for 8 years, to Jeremy, who made the most amazing cover art for the price of SpongeBob's soul, and most of all to my friend Evo, who reminded me of my own words when I needed them the most. Chapter 1. The War Cry. In a land shrouded beneath a blanket of white, an icy gray bastion of stone and sculpted rock stand in defiance to the harsh blizzard howling down from the surrounding mountains. Within the city walls, the citizens had gathered in the courtyard of a towering keep looming over them like a monolith, dwarfing the thatched roof houses of wood and stone at its feet. Up the crude stone steps, aligned perfectly at the midpoint of the keep, a man stood on his knees dressed in steel plates and the remains of a skinned bear, its head hanging lifelessly off his shoulder. At his sides, 2 men clad in similar pelts held axes and a cross before him. A man behind him, withered and elderly, clad in royal furs and a golden crown, addressed the crowd for his final time. "Good people of Vorin-Yelka," he began, his voice quivering with age as he struggled to be heard over the howling blizzard. A snow flurry had begun to season the herd of gathered souls. "I have proudly served as your Jarl for many winters. In my time, I raised 12 new hamlets and swelled the ranks of our armies to unprecedented size," the elder continued. "I saw us through fortune, famine, and plague. I repelled the 27th, 28th, and 29th invasions of Motheri, as well as the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th invasions of Ensum Slot." The crowd cheered for their old king, the screaming winds unable to silence their pride. "I carried the axe of my forefathers against all foes, man and beast." As the elder said this, he raised an axe above his head which caught a patch of unsmothered sunlight. Its pristine silver blade seemed to slice the frozen air as it blew across it. The edge of the axe was wicked, a swelled broad chest tapering at the bottom towards the shaft. The head of the axe carried on into a vertical spike. On the opposite side, a dense rounded ball made the head of a hammer. The shaft was forged of silver, which gleamed in the firelight of the 2 great bonfire torches which flanked either side of the steps. "Perhaps my greatest regret in my service to the proud nation of Vorin-Yelka was my inability to overcome her foes and unite our great continent of Valkenheim under a single banner. I have grown too old to see this goal reach fruition. The strength and vigor of youth have been spent, and the fog of mind becoming of the aged engulfs me." If the old king felt any remorse for himself, his voice did not betray it. "It is with great pride, however, that I introduce the future of our people, of our culture, and our nation. Jarm of Vinland, please rise to your feet," the old man said. Heeding his call, the man with the bearskin armor slowly rose to his feet. "Jarm of Vinland, this is your land. These are your people now. Your sworn duty is to them, for as long as you draw your breath as Jarl," the old king said. Jarmo parted his lips, his voice booming out in reckless defiance of the snow. "I vow my life unto my last dying breath to the nation of Vorin-Yelka, her people, her land, and her legacy. So long as my heart pumps crimson blood through my veins, so too shall I be the beating heart of this city and these people." "Then do you accept the Jarl's crown and the ancestral axe?" the old king asked. "I do," Jarmo answered. "Then turn and be crowned." In perfect precision, Jarmo spun around 180 degrees to face the old king. "With all the power vested in me once by Jarl Koren, I, Jarl Nieminen, appoint thee Jarl Jarmo of Vinland." As the former King Nieminen said this, he placed the powerful axe in Jarmo's hands, removed the ornate golden crown fixed with red jewels and placed it on his head, then wrapped the fur cloak around his shoulders. Once finished, the former king stood wearing the pelt of a white bear which had seen a few too many winters in ornate leathers. "Jarl Jarmo, I ask that your first act be to grant me a good death," Nieminen said, taking the axe from one of the guards. "With honor," Jarmo answered. The two stood on opposite sides of the keep. Taking the axe in each hand, Yarmo felt its heft and raised it up overhead, a final salute which was returned by the former king. Niemanen took the first action. He raised both his hands, his palms glowing in a white ethereal light as the air around them condensed and crystallized, forming 2 spikes of ice. As quickly as they formed, they were airborne, streaking towards Yarmo with a sound like arrows through the wind. Yarmo drew back and swung the massive ancestral axe, its silver blade crashing into the twin spikes and shattering them like glass. Just as Yarmo recovered, he realized the old king had used the spikes as a distraction and was upon him now. A sword made of solid ice manifested in his hands, its tip aimed for Yarmo's heart. Yarmo quickly parried the icy blade with the shaft of his axe, shattering the ice sword before quickly doubling back and heaving with all his strength, the blade catching the old king in the ribs. It was over in an instant. The old man crumbled with a single blow and made no sound as his broken body hit the hard stone floor. His blood pooled in the rectangular grooves between rock slates and followed the pathway to the steps and down each stair. One final fight for the old warrior king. Niemanen's body was quickly collected by his former guards and placed onto a stretcher of hide as he was covered with blankets of sheep's pelt and wool. His pallbearers took him down the steps of his keep one last time and through the crowd of his people. One final tour of his city as the procession continued through the gates, the new Jarl Yarmo following just behind. The funeral march retained the town and gathered more mourners, who followed their former king one final time to a waiting longboat. His guards carried him up its gangway and set him down in the heart of the ship on a bed of hay. A torch was placed at the stern of the ship and lit as an elderly woman placed 2 things in his hands, a bouquet of icy blue flowers in one hand and a sword in the other. No words were spoken as the ship was heaved to, becoming lighter as the freezing waves cradled its hull and began its journey out to sea. A stiff breeze coming down from the mountaintops filled the ship's sails with frosty wind for its final voyage. As the ship grew more distant, seeming to become one with the horizon, a spark was born from the shoreline. A little flame arced through the sky, flickering in the harsh winds had found its mark. The little ship went up in flames quickly, carrying the old king off to oblivion. As the crowd dispersed, some were unable to hold back their tears as they returned to the city. Yarmo felt a hand on his shoulder. "Congratulations, Jarl Yarmo." The king turned to see a friend. Sven also stood at his side with a half-smile, a broad-shouldered man of 28 winters. His long braided blonde hair billowed in the cold winds. Silver honor guard armor defied the cold as snow refused to stick to it. "There is no celebration in the loss of a king, in the death of a man," Yarmo said. "Aye, but there is celebration to be had in the anointing of a new king. Your blow was well struck, Yarmo. Old Jarl Niemanen suffered neither the pain of death nor the decay of age." "It is barbaric to slaughter a man for the crime of being old and lame," Yarmo retorted. "It is tradition," Sven answered. "The new Jarl grants the old a good and honorable death in combat. Such is our way, and has been for centuries." "I know," Yarmo said shortly, turning back towards the castle. Sven stopped him. "Come, Jarl Yarmo, there is to be a feast in your honor." "I have no appetite for feasts," Yarmo pushed past him. Sven shook his head in a mix of disapproval and confusion. Weeks later, Sven pushed into the castle keep of Vornjalka and made his way to its war room in search of his friend. The war room is dark, a large central table illuminated by a candlelight featuring a map of Valkenheim and the known locations of enemy fleets. On the wall hung a larger map, lit by torches which displayed the coastlines mapped as accurately as scouts could manage. The other walls displayed more intricate and detailed terrain maps of the surrounding area and last reported troop locations. Knives and daggers stuck into the canvas and hides the maps were etched onto, plans of attack and defense. "Well met, Jarl," Sven greeted. Hunched over the table, studying the map, Yarmo cast his gaze to meet Sven's. "How go the plans?" Sven asked. "What do you want?" Yarmo sniped. Sven was taken aback, but collected himself with a deep breath and began. "Jarl Yarmo, your warriors grow restless and your citizens impatient. It has been 2 weeks since your coronation, and you have not yet declared a warpath on any of the other clans, nor led a raid on the coasts. The people demand action. The warriors crave blood. Their appetites will go unsated. There will be no declarations of war. Neither shall there be raids, Yarmo shot back. Jarl Yarmo, I need not remind you that the food on our people's plates is brought only from foreign shores or pilfered from others' pantries. Unless you have managed to grow food from the ice, the warriors need a battle. The people need to see their new Jarl in victory, lest they become doubtful of your strength, Sven rationalized. Then let any man who doubts my strength match me in battle in the arena. If he can best me, let him be Jarl, Yarmo fired off. Sven began to grow irate. Jarl, I know the loss of Nieminen affects you as it does us all, but inaction is not a solution. You cannot sit idly by while the people starve. Let us take up arms against Ensign Slot. Scouts report the Great Hall from their most recent raid. Let their fortune become our fortune, Sven said. No, Yarmo answered shortly. Then the raid is in order. Wolkenstadt is in harvest season. A quick strike at their northern shores would set our people for months, Sven said. I said no. Yarmo boomed, his fist slamming against the wooden desk and punching straight through. His voice struck Sven as hard as a punch, sending him stumbling and reeling until he slammed against the floor. Confusion quickly gave way to rage as Sven shot back up. What then? What do you intend to do? Nothing? You can't just stand idly by, Yarmo. Come here. Yarmo grabbed Sven and heaved him to his feet, dragging him over to the table and angrily jamming his finger onto the map. Every move is wrong. If I lead the men past Mount Impasse, we're perfectly funneled into the same choke point which has claimed legions of lives so many times before. Sven wrenched himself out of Yarmo's grasp. Then we attack by sea. Our men are the finest sailors in the north, he argued, his hands gesturing wildly. So quickly you've forgotten the tragedy of Portsmouth. 5 ships, 50 men each, all lost to the deep. The survivors struggled to the shores, frozen and exhausted, only to be hacked to pieces by the waiting army of Motorway. No! There will be no raids by sea, no attacks by land. Every action we can take will only result in the needless deaths of our countrymen. Yarmo roared, grabbing Sven's collar and slamming him to the wall. So you'll sit here and study your damned map because you're afraid to spill a little blood? Sven shoved him off. I'm on your side, Yarmo. Who vouched for your valor in the Templar raid? Who led the mead halls and songs of your victory over the dogs of Wolkenstadt? Who raised a glass to your name when selection for Jarl began? You wouldn't even be wearing that crown nor wielding that axe if not for me. Yarmo turned his back in anger. Sven grabbed his shoulder and spun him around, embracing his other shoulder. Listen, Jarl Yarmo. Men bleed and die. You lead them as best you can, and the rest is up to the strength of their silver and sword arms. I know the deaths of your men weigh heavily on you. Who picked up your drunken carcass when you lost your militia to the army of Providence? Who pulled you back from the cliff when the icebreaker sank and took our crew down to the seabed save for you? Don't treat me like your enemy, Sven pleaded. Yarmo shoved past him. I'm leaving for a couple of weeks. Watch over Vorin while I'm away. Where are you going? You can't just leave your own people, Sven raged. I'm saving them, Yarmo barked. The king's words hit Sven in the chest as though he'd been kicked, and he stumbled back. Sven locked eyes with Yarmo, the two exchanging a righteous burning rage before Yarmo turned out the door. When the door had slammed shut, Sven felt his blood boil and knocked the table to the floor with a loud thud, shouting in frustration. The gate guards eyed Yarmo suspiciously as he passed. He was wearing a black cloak, his ornate crown absent, clad in the bear hide and gleaming silver armor of his ancestors. The only item which denoted his rank as Jarl was the great two-handed axe over his shoulder. Dust the fighters at the top of Vorin Keep. This land has no Jarl till I return. Without any further words, the dark figure of Yarmo disappeared into the snowblind. In the darkened mead hall of the great keep, Sven had just sat down at a massive ebony long table. Looking across the great table, it occurred to Sven for the first time that he'd never before noticed its color, nor its size. The top of the table, normally obscured completely with gleaming pewter dishes piled high with meats, mead, fruits, and vegetables cooked perfectly over the open flame in the hearth of the hall, now appeared bereft and destitute. Just 3 lonely dishes now graced the top of the oversized table, each containing little more than a few incomplete rolls of bread. Steins, usually filled and frothing with mead, were now absent. A single pitcher on a silver platter stood alone, offering only melted snow water. In the center of the floor, a great fire pit heated up the room. The spit which rested overhead was barren, naught but an iron rod mocking Sven with the memory of a roasted pig or a lamb. "We can't eat patience, Sven." That line came back to him, spoken by the chef in response to these meager rations which had begun about a week prior. "We can't eat patience. Our people can't either. If Jarl Yarmo doesn't return soon, and return with meat, his may be the shortest reign there ever was," the cook had said. This quickly drew Sven's ire. "You utter those words in my company again, and it will be the cook's tongue which is served next." The portly chef quickly stood down and said nothing more, but Sven knew his words to be true. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Yarmo disappeared into the blizzard. Without the authority of Jarl, Sven could neither order a war nor a raid, only maintain some semblance of order. This was quickly becoming more difficult, however, as rations dwindled. Meat had run out 2 weeks ago, mead a week later, and in another week bread would be gone, and with it any last hope of Yarmo's reign. All Sven could offer in Yarmo's absence were empty promises that even he was uncertain of. Soon. That was always his go-to answer. "When will Yarmo return?" "Soon." "When will we eat?" another would ask. "Soon." That was good enough at first, then suddenly it wasn't. "Tomorrow, maybe the next day." But that excuse didn't last as long as the first. Harder to answer with more specific questions. "Where is Yarmo?" "Should we prepare a raid?" "Should I be forging swords still?" Those questions Sven did not have an answer for. Suddenly, a sound echoed and reverberated through the empty hall. "Sven! I've news from the gate!" Sven heard him before he saw him. Finn, a scrawny, wiry little scamp of a boy, a messenger. "Speak, boy," Sven boomed. "Jarl Yarmo returns!" Sven rose from the table, knocking the chair to the floor as he stood up. By the time Sven had run down the steps of the keep and made it to the front gate, Yarmo was already through it. He looked terrible. His cloak was shredded, its torn remnants doing nothing to cover his head as the last scraps billowed in the icy sheer winds. Parts of Yarmo's toned body were completely exposed through his armor, the plates cracked and shattered. Sections of his armor were blackened as if torched. Across his left eye, going down his cheek to his jaw, there was a large gaping wound that forced his eyes shut as a streak of crimson oozed down his face and dripped onto what remained of his chest plate. Fresh blood dripped down his left arm, which hung limp at his side. The bear pelt over his shoulders had lost its head, and his hide boots were full of holes. His right hand held his axe over his shoulder. He stood tall, powerful, unshaken. A single blue eye locked with Sven's. "Jarl Yarmo, you've returned," Sven said first, almost questioningly, a crowd of villagers running up to swarm their returning king. Before Sven could continue, a swarm of questions from every angle, each clamoring over one another to be heard, drowned out even the whistling wind shear. "Jarl Yarmo, did you find food?" "Yarmo, what of the raids?" "Jarl, we must muster an army. Men are approaching from..." Yarmo tilted his head back, his stringy blonde hair caked with blood, falling to his shoulders and matting to his armor. He closed his eyes as if praying. Suddenly, all was drowned out by the loudest shout Sven had ever heard. He wasn't sure when he'd hit the ground, only that he was suddenly lying flat on his back, his ears ringing. Sven blinked a few times in confusion, his head spinning and swirling. Yarmo appeared before him, offering a hand up to his feet. Sven gratefully accepted, letting Yarmo guide him up into the keep as he stumbled over himself. When Sven could hear again, the questions to Yarmo began. "What by the All-Father was that?" Yarmo was standing at the opposite side of the room, his back turned as he studied a map. He wore only a ragged pair of trousers as a nurse busied herself cleaning his wounds, frustrated at his refusal to sit. "My war cry," Yarmo answered. "What?" was all Sven could muster. "The war cry," Yarmo repeated. "For weeks, something began to change within me. Something deep in my chest could be channeled into a directed attack. Shout low, and even the most mighty trees became but twigs, tossed aside by the force. Shout high, and it shatters the eardrums and will of even Valkenheim's fiercest beasts. Sven perked up. You have a new form of magic. That's incredible. So that's where you went off to, training your new power, he continued. With that new war cry under our control, we can bring back more food than ever before from those Volkenstadt dogs. Ha! I bet even Motorway and Ansem Slot will bend to their knees before us now, Sven reveled. Yarmo whirled around and struck him with a furious one-eyed glare. No! My ruling earlier stands. There will be no raids. No wars. Sven grit his teeth and threw himself to his feet. God's damned it all, Yarmo! You've been gone for 3 fucking weeks. There's been naught for meat nor mead. We've eaten down to our last bread rations and you still refuse to fight. I'm not leading my men into suicide. Nothing changes that, Yarmo answered more calmly. You lead your clan to an early grave by starvation. How do you intend to feed your people? With patience? Sven demanded. They can start with the dragon corpse that lays on the foot of the Ostwall mountain, Yarmo replied. Sven opened his mouth to speak again, but stopped short. What did you say? Half a day's walk from the rear gate, less if they ride. The gate guards will find the corpse of an ice dragon. They may pilfer the meat from its bones, Yarmo said. Wait, what? Sven stuttered. You killed a dragon? And drank its blood, Yarmo answered deadpan. How did you... Why? Sven stuttered. Legends speak of the first Jarl of Voronjalka, who conquered all using a voice with the destructive power of 100 giants. It is said he cultivated this power through the slaying of a dragon and the consumption of its blood. I knew if this legend were true, it would be the only way to succeed where old Jarl Niemanen had failed. We aren't raiding or warring anymore. In 1 week, we won't need to, Yarmo continued. I'm going to call a blood moot. All the Jarls of Valkenheim are to be summoned at once. In one fell swoop, we will determine the fate of this land and of every clan. Send each Jarl a letter challenging them to a battle in our arena. Let each clan send a single champion. Each of the 9 champions will enter the arena. 1 will emerge. Victor takes control of every clan's land, castle, and people. Sven stuttered and stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. You're going to challenge every Jarl to a duel? What if they disagree? They can't, Yarmo said. Not if they want to keep their honor. To decline a blood moot is to say without saying that your clan is too weak to participate. Let them all come. They will all fall to Voronjalka. Then, who is to be our champion? Sven asked. Yarmo turned and locked eyes with him again. Me. That was chapter 1 of my first book, Darkest Ages, Wolves of the North. If you like what you heard so far, please stick around. There's 9 chapters in total to get through. I'm going to be narrating every single one of them and doing my best to voice act for all the different characters. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Interaction helps with the algorithm. I'll see you guys next time.